I have a table here with a year column and month column, and then I've concatenated the two into one called the year month, and then I have a sales column. For simplicity's sake, I don't have multiple rows per year and month combination, and I've added this date column, which will become relevant later. And all this does is convert the October 2021 into an actual date, because right now this is text and a number, and that will matter later on once I move into Power BI. What I want to do is to create an arbitrarily shaped filter, which is what the authors of the Definitive Guide to DAX call it. What I want is not to grab the sales for December for each year, but I want to grab the last row for each year. And I have data for 2021 December, which would be the last month for 2021. And I have for December 2022, but I don't have any rows for November 2023 because we are currently on the 11th of November. So I don't have that data, which means I don't want to grab December 2023 because that doesn't exist. I want to grab the last month with data. If I try to make a basic pivot table within Excel, I'm able to do what I want to do. If we ignore this date column, which I've added manually, then I won't be able to do it very easily. If I simply add year and month to my columns and then sales to values, and I actually also want this. Actually, I guess I did that in the wrong order. Yeah, I need to add a slicer instead, because when I'm in a table, I can very easily say I won't be able to simply say December because then 2023 is filtered out, and I can't look into 1 year because that doesn't give me what I want. Because I've added this year month concatenated column, I am able to do what I want to do. If I make another pivot table and then I use this as a filter, and then I add year month, so the concatenated column. And the important part here is that this column is unique, which is one of the reasons why I can do it. Because here I can say, well, I want 2021 December and 2022 December and then November. Of course, this is a manual filter, which means I'll need to update this once I am in December 2023, and I need to add 2024 January once I'm in January, which means this is a manual task, which you have to remember to update every month, and you're going to forget that. So that's a bad idea. One last thing I can do inside of Excel is to use this date column, which I've manually added. But the important thing is that this is recognized as a date, which means when I make this last pivot table, instead of using my year column and month column, I'll instead be using my date column. And you'll immediately see that I get these months, quarters, and years, which I do want some of those. I don't want quarters. I never want quarters. If I then expand them, you can see that I get this, and because this is recognized as a date, I can manually go up here and say I want to do my selection. So that would be December, December, and November. But again, this is a manual task and you'll have to do this. Moving into Power BI, all I've done in Power Query is simply to load and then say that the date column should be a date, which becomes important later on. And you'll also notice that year is a number, which will be annoying because of when I start creating the table, but I want to keep it this way. And as always, anytime you work with a date, you need to create the date calendar, which I'm going to do off screen because it's boring to watch. The only thing exciting about this calendar table is that if I try to use auto calendar, I got a circular reference error. Instead, I chose to create a minimum date variable, which simply grabs the smallest value from my sales table, and a max date, which grabs the max, and then I use the calendar function to create this table. And I've recreated the same columns as before, and I've used this month number, and this will be a key later on to do what I want to do. This column is normally only used to sort the month name column, but it's a key ingredient to make my arbitrarily shaped filter work. Then I have to create my relationship, and it's going to be a one-to-one relationship, which I don't want. I want this to be a one-to-many because I'm being lazy and not adding more rows. So it should be from the calendar is one-to-many. I don't want cross-filtering. And then I need to remember to mark this as a date table. In order to create the same visual as I did in Excel, I can start out by simply grabbing my year and month, and then lastly the sales. And normally it would try to summarize the year, but inside the table, TBL sales, I've selected the year column and set that it should not summarize. Otherwise, it's just going to give you a very high number. And because I have the year month column, and because this is unique across years and months, I can again go in and say I want December and November. And as explained, this is going to be a problem because this requires manual updating, which I can add as a note here saying that this requires manual updating. Before I move further, I do want to add one measure, which is simply going to be sum of sales. And because this is a measure, I won't run into a problem with add columns later because it now has a calculate because this is a measure. I now want to visualize the process I want to do, and I'm doing that using a calculated table. And before I go further, I want to say the calculated table looks a lot more complicated than the final measure, but I want to visualize each step in order to explain what's going on. So I do need a complicated function called TreatAs. I can start out by making a new table called temp, which is going to house the first of many variables called my inner table, which I of course need to define first. I want to first summarize, and because I have a relationship between my calendar table and my T-bill sales, I want to summarize based on the year of the calendar table. So this is my table, and I want to grab all the years, and I could actually get the same result using values. So this will simply give me the 3 years. And then upon this table, I then want to add a column. And luckily, DAX is very nice with indentation. So upon this summarized table, I want to add a new column where I want to first show what won't work. I'll call this max month, and I want to grab the maximum from my month column inside of my calendar table. And this is going to get September every single time, which is for two reasons. First of all, it's because I'm trying to grab the maximum of a text, which is going to be September because S is bigger than December, D, and there's no filter context going on right now because add columns is an iterator, which means it doesn't actually care that September doesn't exist in 2023. September has been added inside of my calendar table because it wants to have all the values between the minimum and the maximum with no empty rows in between, which is how I get September. And this has a simple solution, which is to remember that add columns is an iterator, which means I either need to use a measure or to wrap my function and calculate. October is the max in 2021 because that's when my table begins on the 1st of October 2021, whereas in 2023 it goes down to the 1st of November, which still leaves me with the problem of October, September, September, which isn't what I want. And that's why I said that this month number column, which is normally useless outside of sorting the month name column, it's actually important here because I don't want to grab the month, the text string. I actually want to grab the month number, because this will then be 12 in 2021 and 22 because it has December, and here it will be 11 because it has November. And again, because I've used calculate, it's able to do context transition because add columns is an iterator. Of course, this isn't what I want, and it's also not the max month, it's the max month number, but this is my first of many tables. I then want to add another table, which is going to be called TreatAs table, where I then use the TreatAs function. And what this does is it allows me to take this table that I have here and say that I want you to treat the year column as if it's the year column from the calendar table, which means I have a relationship between the calendar and the sales table, which I can then use. And likewise, I want to treat this max month number as if it's a month number column inside the calendar table, which again means I have a relationship between the two tables. And I don't strictly speaking need to do this. I could go in and manually creating a relationship, but I don't want to do that because I'll be deleting this table. Instead, I'll say I want to treat the inner table as if its first column is actually the calendar date column. Actually, that shouldn't be the date, that should be the year column. And as if the second column is then the month number column. And if I then return this, nothing has happened except that month number is now written as month number instead of max month number. And you can't see anything going on because it's not actually a visual thing. But I'll show afterwards what happens if I don't do this TreatAs, which means I'm actually going to ignore this the first time so you can see what happens if I don't do it. I then want my outer table, which is where I then add a column to this, which should then be the related month to this number. I could actually add the month name column using a function where I use the month function to say I want the first of this column's month of this column's year, but I'm going to instead use a lookup. And again, it doesn't really matter because I'll be deleting the table. So I again want to add a column to my, in this case, I first want to do to the inner table to see what happens. And this new column should be called month name. And I need that in quotation marks, which is then the month name from, actually I need the max function because otherwise it gets confused because how can I grab one value from a table? So max simply makes it so I can only get one value, which should be the month of my date table, and then parentheses here. And then I should print the outer table. And once again, this gives me September because add columns is an iterator and I need that context transition. So I'll wrap it in calculate. this still gives me the wrong result because the inner table doesn't have any relationship, which means my filters aren't working properly. Which means when I'm looking in 2022, it still tries to grab September because it doesn't understand that it should be using the relationships. And all I have to do to fix that is to change what table I'm adding a column to. And then it's being a bit annoying and changing up my column orders, but that doesn't matter. Using the TreatAs table, it now properly understands the context transition I'm trying to do here, and is then saying that when I go into calendar month to grab that one value, I should take the value in the current rows as year column and apply that as a filter, and the current value in the month number and apply that as a filter. And that will then give me all the dates between the 1st of December to the 31st of December. So when I use max on month name, it will only return one value. That was a complicated way to do something very simple. Because I don't care about the month number, I actually want to delete this, and this is kind of a pointless step, but again, I'll do it for visualization purposes. I want to remove the month number table, number column, and you've already seen the TreatAs, so I'll skip what it does. And I want to select then only some columns from my outer table, and those columns are then the year, which is what I want to call it, which should then be year from my calendar table, and the month column, which is then actually my calculated column because I added up here, and then I need to mind my parentheses, which means this then returns a table with two columns, and then I need to treat that first column as if it's the calendar year column and the second column as if it's the month column. And I could do this select column all the way at the end, and it doesn't really matter, but this way you can see TreatAs being used again. If I were to remove this TreatAs portion, actually, I guess it works right here, but I think when I add the new column, then it will break. So that's a bit of a spoiler, I guess. The last table I want to add is then adding my sum of sales calculation, which again is to add a column to my remove month number column, where I want to add sum of sales, which is then the sum of sales. And because this is a measure, I don't need context transition by wrapping this in calculate. And then this is going to give 60, 150, and 150, which is wrong, because if we go into TBL sales, it should then be 30 and 60 and 80. And again, this is because I haven't added the TreatAs, so it doesn't properly understand how to add the filters, because December is actually summing all the rows for 2021, and likewise for 2022, it's summing all the month and all the month. But if I simply re-add the TreatAs, then it will work properly. And again, don't worry, the actual measure is a lot simpler, but I wanted to visualize it because now that I do have this calculated table, I could choose to use this inside of my report, meaning I would then go in and say, I have the exact columns I want, except I want to say that for this year column, I don't want to aggregate it. And this is then what it's trying to do. It's trying to sum up the years. So because I have 3 years, it's going to do that. And I guess it maybe didn't update. If I just delete that and try again, now it's understanding what it's supposed to do. Meaning this is then the calculated table method, which I wouldn't suggest using because now you're adding an extra table, and why do that? It's annoying to look at. Instead, what I can do is to add a measure. I want to say sum of sales, but only for the latest months. That means I need to grab the latest months, which should then be I want to calculate because I need to change the filter. Because actually, if I just create the table first, it should again be year, month, and then sum of sales. And then I also want to add this extra one, but now this doesn't have the filter, which means when I'm in my visualization, I'm going to get filter context for the year and the month because those are the columns I have. I want to keep the filter on year because I do only want one row for each year, but I need to remove the filter on month so that I can then grab the highest month, which means I want to calculate again the max of my month number because this is a number. So the max will get 12, 12, and 11 instead of September. Then I want to pass in a table as my filter, which should be all calendar month, meaning I want to grab the highest value of the month number column from my calendar table, and I want to keep all the filters that have been applied on the calendar table via my visualization, except any that have been applied on month, which means again for 2023, I will then have 2023 and October, November, and December, and then October and November, where then November's number is going to be greater than October. And actually, I just want to see if we just return the latest month, and I guess I need an extra parentheses. If I try adding this, then that will be 12, and actually that should be 11. I can't exactly explain what's going on with it, but I tried recreating the file, and now it seems to work. I can't even explain what was going on, but it was as if this filter wasn't being applied and it instead just calculated the month number without removing the filter context, which is what calculate is supposed to do. So yeah, don't know why that happened, but it now works. This is what I want for 2021, which has the month December. The highest month is 12, the same for 2022, and for 2023 it's 11. But I don't want to print the month, I want to show the sum of sales. I'll add another variable that actually does my summing, which again is a simple calculate. I want to calculate my sum of sales in a filter context, and actually I should do that on another line. In a filter context where the month number from the calendar table should be equal to the latest month, and then I can print that instead. And this has now filtered out all of the rows where I don't have a sum of sales for, which means all of those months in the middle in my calendar table, all of those rows in the middle from my calendar table, they have been removed, so I don't have any January 2022. And because I still have the sum of sales column within my table, I still see all the other rows. I don't want to see those, that's the whole point of the exercise. When I then remove that measure, I only get the 3 rows where I have a value for. If I then added data for December 2023, I would get that row. And likewise, if I add data for 2020 or 2024, I would get those rows, which means this is then automatically updating. And that was all I wanted to show. So, yep,